Welcome to another episode of the Trusted Advisor podcast and video series powered by the Retail Solutions Providers Association. Our goal on the pod is to accelerate the success of today's and tomorrow's leaders in the retail IT industry. I'm Jim Roddy, back with you again. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, frequent listeners and viewers of our podcast know that our plan for 2024 is to talk with leaders from both within and outside the RSPA member community about their leadership journeys and what they've learned along the way. Our special guest today is Ryan Girvin, the CEO of value-added distributor BlueStar. Ryan joined BlueStar in 2001 as a controller before being promoted to VP of Finance, then CFO, then COO, and then to CEO. Ryan, welcome to the Trusted Advisor.
Thank you very much for having me, Jim. I appreciate it.
No, glad to have you here. So BlueStar, very well known in our industry, but not everybody knows you. So can you tell us about your path from working outside our channel a little over 2 decades ago to where you are today?
Sure, absolutely. So, my path, I don't have a lot on my resume. I worked 4 years straight out of college in public accounting, and that was the oldest accounting firm in Cincinnati. And it was a small group, but luckily enough for me, one of their clients was BlueStar. So that's how I kind of got integrated into BlueStar early. I got to know who they were. I got to know who the players were and build some of those relationships. So I spent 4 years in public accounting. And then I could see the potential that BlueStar had, but I could also see the growing pains that they were having. So near the end of my career in public accounting, I had reached out to Doug Bivens, their controller at the time, and said, "Hey, you're going to need some help, and when you do, please keep me in mind." So about 6 months later, I got that call, and he brought me on board, and it's been a wild ride ever since. So as you said, I've been here for 22 years. I've matured a lot over the years, and it's pretty crazy to see where the company's grown to. And you got my titles right. It's CFO, COO, and amazingly the CEO at this point. But and as you know, due to a very tragic circumstance that we experienced last November with our founder and CEO president, Steve Cuntz, passing away. But I'm very honored to be able to step into his role and try to carry the torch on behalf of the company.
Great. Yeah. And so you that's what I was going to mention. You're following in the footsteps of the late Steve Cuntz, passed away in November. And so industry legend, right? Like you said, the person who led BlueStar from 3 employees to $1 billion company. And before we talk about the challenge of leading a successful, growing organization, right? You've seen it from when it was smaller, maybe not 3, but smaller and grown up. Can you talk first about Steve as a mentor? Like, how did he mentor you? Like, was it formal training? Was it informal? And then what are some of the key lessons that you learned from him?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that probably his tactic was more informal. There was very often just meetings and discussions about just education, right? I always felt comfortable sitting down with him and saying, "Hey, help me understand why you made this decision or what's going on." And, with that approach, he was always willing to share. When I started at BlueStar, one of the things that I asked them about was, do I need to go and get a master's or an extra degree or a license in something? And they said, "You're going to learn more here under us. If you want to go do that for your own personal reasons, then have at it. But we're going to teach you plenty." And it's been a great education. And I would say that, for Steve, early on, he really taught me about 2 things. And I would say that's being accountable and being prepared. And so when I say accountable, it's not just personal accountability. It was, I might turn something in or give some data, and maybe that information wasn't correct. And it wasn't so much like, "Shucks, you messed up. Hey, be better next time." But he really kind of instilled in me that, what if that data was the data that he used to make a decision, and now he's making the wrong decision on behalf of the company? So you owe it to all the employees to come in prepared and be accountable for the data that you're giving whomever's making that decision. So, that was a different aspect for me. You kind of walk in and you go, well, shucks, I messed that up, or my spreadsheet didn't total correctly. But there were bigger ramifications for screwing up. And that was one thing that he really kind of instilled in me. And then the other thing I would say is preparedness. And if you know Steve, you know that, Steve had a unique way of looking at a lot of stuff. And anytime I would go to Steve and I would be looking for approval for a solution or dialogue, tell me if I'm on the right track or not, I learned very early on to try to think through everything from every point of view you could possibly come up with. And, that's tough to do, especially early on in your career.
Right.
But, it never got any better. And as much as you might, rack your brain and think that you've come in with the perfect solution, he would inevitably have something. And he'd say, well, did you consider this? And he's like, all right. So, that could be very frustrating at times, but I'll tell you that I truly believe that is how he sharpened all of us around here, was not to just go to the first solution that you think is proper, but think through it all. And I think we've all benefited from that kind of mindset.
And so thank you so much for that. Those are great details. Can you even zoom out a little bit? Because again, this is the third of our, leadership podcasts that we've been doing, and things that have come up in the first couple, our first initiative, right? In terms of, like you said, it wasn't just Steve pulled you to the side and said, let me explain this to you. You were asking him a lot of questions. And then another thing that's really come up is candor, right? In terms of, if you want to get better, you have to be open to and understanding failure is part of the process, and getting corrected for that is important. I guess, can you talk about those aspects as well? Kind of combine the initiative to put yourself out there and talk about how can I do better, and then the initiative to be prepared and not just go, this is good enough, and being ready for folks to tell you this is where it can get better. And not just folks, but again, the founder and CEO of the company, like that can be scary stuff.
That's right. That's right. And, I'm sure it was a great thing for me to be able to have that exposure to Steve, right? And not be sheltered from it. And, Steve was the kind of guy that the one thing that he was he was loyal to everyone. And if you showed the initiative and showed that you had the desire to dig in and help him and help the team, then, you were given the ability to mess up because of the fact that was an investment. And he would always say, it's how you learn, right? You've got to make those mistakes to make sure, and that we're growing. And, it wasn't always fun, right? And, he would be quick to correct. And, but then he was also quick to point out the flaws and how we should have gone about thinking about it differently. So as long as you were willing to take that shot and, voice your opinion, be engaging, he was willing to spend the time and effort to grow each one of us.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people knew him. They saw him as an entrepreneur. Also, people knew him as a football player, right? He was a running back in college, and right, he had that, go right on in. But a lot of people didn't know him. Like, he had an accounting background, right? And so he was very, like you said, organized, prepared, things of that nature. Can you share us with some folks, maybe some behind the scenes in terms of maybe that part that they didn't see in terms of the preparation, the organization, that might have gotten overshadowed by some of those other qualities?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that probably surprises a lot of people that Steve was an accountant. And it makes my job more difficult, right? When your boss, and Doug Bivens obviously was an accountant, Steve Cuntz was an accountant. So when your bosses know accounting as good as you, and of course the joke was always, who knew accounting better? But it makes it a little more difficult. But it also is great too, because they were great resources for me. I had a resource. I didn't have to go outside looking for help. I could just go up and say, hey, I'm struggling with this. Can you help me out with this? And they were always more than willing to do it. But they also know very quickly how to tell you how you might have been doing something wrong, because they know how to do your job just as well as you do. So it's there's pros and cons to both.
Right. It's like an athlete, like if you're a basketball player, like, oh, I get to play with some NBA guys and what a great learning opportunity, but also you're going to get dunked on sometimes, right? Any
That's right.
any flaw that you have, it's going to be exposed. So, but yeah, iron sharpens iron, and you got to
Yeah,
be willing to do that. So, so
right.
we talked about Steve as a mentor. Can you talk about, besides him, who are some other leaders that you looked up to as mentors, folks who've helped you shape your leadership approach? Like, what did they, who are they? What did they do? What did they say that's had a lasting impact on you?
Sure. And I'd already mentioned Doug Bivens, and Doug really was, he was a great leader for me. We worked together for a long time, as I said, public accounting, he was there. And then when I came on, we worked for 22 years together. And so he was, I owe him a lot for what he's done for me in my career. He and I worked together. We traveled together quite a bit. We lived a lot of life together, but we also had a lot of fun doing it along the way. But one way that he was a good mentor to me was I always felt like I could approach him with anything. And so, we would leave a meeting, and if I was maybe say shy about asking a question in front of a group and didn't want to, expose my ignorance, I could sit down in a meeting behind closed doors with him and ask him for understanding. And I never felt like, I was being ridiculed or belittled by him, even on, topics that maybe were, I'll say controversial, not that they really were, but maybe there was more than one approach to it. I could sit down with him and say, hey, here's what my thoughts were on it. Help me understand your thoughts and hear me out, right? And he always did. He always gave me the time, and he would invest the time not just to listen, but to also instruct. So I really appreciated that. And so I took that as, if it meant a lot to me that Doug would take that kind of time with me, then I wanted to make sure that I was also um, exhibiting that to the people that I was leading.
Excellent. No, thank you for that. Yeah, Doug's been a great guy. I've got to know him,
Yeah,
over the past 20 plus years or so. So,
yeah.
any other mentors you'd want to talk about?
Yeah, I was going to say, and this one isn't actually so much a person, but I'll say it was a book that really kind of got me thinking about leadership differently. And that book is The 360-Degree Leader by John Maxwell. And I read that years ago, and I was probably frustrated at the time at maybe not feeling like I was respected as a leader, right? I was probably, more young and immature in my career at the time. And I think that, the idea that a title brings you leadership and respect, and quite honestly, it doesn't.
Hmm.
So when I read that book, it really kind of opened my eyes to, you've got to be intentional about leadership. But if you're intentional about it and you're relatable to people, you can lead people from all angles. Leadership to me at the time was always how I'm leading the direct reports to me. But then when I read that book, I was like, you really can lead sideways to your peers. You can even lead up. And so by reading that book, that really kind of got me inspired to say, you need to go about this a different way. And so that's really kind of what I would say spurred me to try to go at it at a different angle. And I really kind of owe a lot to that book as well.
Yeah, I've got some Maxwell books on the shelf behind me, but I've not read 360-Degree Leader. I will definitely add that to my list. But it's interesting you bring that up. One of the best leaders I ever worked with, his name was John Dudenhofer. He was retired from the Air Force, and his last job at the Air Force, he was the commandant of their leadership academy, right? So he was the leader of all the leaders. And the biggest thing that he emphasized was just what you were talking about in terms of like, if you want to teach people to be good followers, how are you as a follower, right? You can't always be, I'm leading, 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 right? You sometimes have to follow other people, and sometimes it's collaborating with them. How are
That's
you
right.
at deferring to them and making sure that they're involved? And that was really like, oh, never quite thought of it that way. And that's been in the back of my mind. That sounds like that's a lot of what that book taught you, is not just how are these people going to follow me, but how am I going to support them? How are you going to make sure I work well with others and lead from every angle?
Absolutely. You got that right. And it's, avoiding the politics that might be in the company And like you said, it doesn't have to be my solution. It could be whoever's solution, but get on board, collaborate around that, be a team member, have a voice, right? If you're sitting in meetings and you're not speaking up and you're say a wallflower, and it's like, oh, what did they bring to the meeting? You need to bring something to the meeting, right? Why are you here? And just being prepared. Kind of going back to what I was saying about Steve is,
Yep.
you come to a meeting, be prepared. You do those things and people are going to start trusting in you.
Yeah, good things are going to happen for sure. So, we're going to take a quick break to thank our sponsors who support the RSPA community and make this podcast and video series possible. Our gold sponsors are CoCard, Epson, Heartland, and ScanSource. And our platinum sponsor is somebody Ryan will recognize. Our platinum sponsor is BlueStar. Finally, we want to make sure everybody knows registration is now open for Retail Now 2024, the Retail IT Channel's #1 trade show, education conference, and networking event. This year's event is set for July 28th through 30th at the Paris Hotel in Las Vegas. For more information, go to gorspa.org/retail now. Retail now is where the industry meets. So, all right. Well, thank you for that. And so I want to ask you, and this will be a tough question. So, talk about the leadership challenge that's ahead of you. We talked earlier that Steve passed away November 4th. We're recording this in early February, and so of 2024, the following year. So I want to know, I'm sure you want to carry on Steve's legacy, but at the
Absolutely.
same time, right, you have to be true to yourself and lead the way that you're the most comfortable. And so it certainly helps you work side by side with Steve, right? And you were on the BlueStar board together and did that for so many years. But
For
I guess,
sure.
can you frame up for our listeners and viewers, like, how do you see your challenge as a leader, especially as a first year CEO? What are you thinking about? What actions are you taking? Like, maybe more importantly, what actions are you maybe intentionally not taking because you don't want to be disruptive? I guess talk about that challenge if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, with when Steve passed in November, really, quite honestly, my focus was let's just finish the year strong, right? Let's not focus on reinventing any wheel. Let's just do what we do on a daily basis and finish the year strong. So now that we're in 2024, okay, it's time to have some of those conversations and start tweaking some things. There's always areas that you can tweak, right? So it's for me, it's learning from a different perspective and a mindset change. I'm definitely trying to learn to be more thinking and working on the business and not in the business, getting out of the weeds as much as I can. And it's early, right? So I give myself some grace. Okay, it's been a month into the year. We'll get there. The aspect that I've been working with people for 20 plus years that have now all of a sudden become a direct report to, which were peers in the past. Well, it's a different perspective as well. So just trying to. I'm a very I probably overthink everything. So I spend a lot of time in thought and strategizing on my approach to things. So especially when it comes to dealing with personalities that I've dealt with, but I'm now dealing with them in a different context. I just want to make sure that I don't misstep and lose the trust and support that I've had. Everyone has been super supportive, and I suspect that that'll continue. But you don't want to misstep too soon, and or anytime. But and one of the things that I'm focused on, and I think this is not something that's just relevant to me. This was relevant to everybody and to Steve beforehand, is company culture. I think that we can do a better job. We need to be intentional about working on our company culture. We need to communicate more with our employees. And so for me, as I'm trying to contemplate on setting a vision, I also wonder now, what is that vision? How might it stop if it doesn't permeate down to the employees because maybe someone is either intentionally or unintentionally blocking it? So, I'm just trying to be very mindful of making sure that the vision is spread throughout the company.
Great. Thank you for that. I want to follow up on a few of those items. First,
Sure.
when you talk about culture and communication, remember Tony Hsieh, who was the CEO of Zappos, and he said, even if communication is one of the best things that you do, there's always room to improve with communication, right? Like no matter what, that is just an
Right.
ongoing thing. I'm hoping you can dive a little bit more into that concept of, you had folks who were peers who you worked with side by side for so long, and then
Hmm.
you move into the role where you're their boss, right? Their supervisor. And I know a lot of our members are going through this as well, right? Because they're delegating to somebody inside the business to take over and lead the business. And so even if you're a 5-person company, right, and you're moving up and supervising now 3 people who you'd worked elbow to elbow with before, can you talk about that challenge and what are you doing about that to make that go as smooth as possible, if you're willing to share that?
Sure. And it's a process, right? And I'm early on in the process. It's trying to get others to understand that I need them, right, from a supportive standpoint, to be maybe more of the legs and the feet than the hands and the feet of getting things done. And for some, that's a different process than maybe we've had in their roles. So it's kind of just letting them know you have the ability to go do this. You have the title, you have everything you need. And so it's just having those conversations to say, you don't need to come to me for approval on this. You don't need to come to me. If you want to come to me for, bouncing ideas off of me, I'm happy to do it. But please understand that you already have the ability. So just go and do it. Do what's right. And you've been here longer than I have. You know the right answer.
Hmm.
Just go do it. And I was talking to a customer of ours, and he's, to your point, he's a 5, 6, 7-person company, and he's tired, right? And we were talking about it, and he feels like he's the one that makes all the decisions. And that is one aspect that I do appreciate, that I have a team. And it's just going back to them now and saying, okay, let's work together. I'm not taking shots at you, but we all know, every department, even my finance department, we can all be better. And if you go in with the right approach, and if they know that you're doing it with the right heart, then it's a much easier conversation to have.
Yes, yeah. If the intent, everybody agrees upon the intent is pure to try to figure this out together, that's going to go along the way, as opposed to, are
That's
you
right.
taking something away from me on my job? Are you trying to take over? And I guess this is, if I can paint this picture for you, tell me if you agree with this or not. And this is for anybody transitioning into a leadership role or anybody in your current organization, that your direct reports need to know what stuff can they do on their own, what stuff is there overlap, right, where you should be bouncing stuff off one another, and then
Mhm.
what things are they going to bring to you, and it's ultimately your decision because somebody has to make the call. And it sounds like you have to communicate that, and that you have to always keep communicating that so folks know where those different areas are. I guess, do you agree with that? Am I painting that the right way? Is that kind of the challenge that the one of the things you're tackling now?
I think that's accurate. And that's the piece that I'm working on now, is to reinforce to them, you have the ability to make these decisions. And so it's not that they're making decisions that I would prefer them to bring to me. It's the opposite. You
Hmm.
have the ability. Go ahead and make those decisions. And we've been working so close together. I don't think anyone's going to make a decision that they don't come to me when they should, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But we'll navigate that when it comes to it. But I think for now, my focus is more on empowering them to make those decisions in the place that they are today.
Got it. Great. And it can't just be between your ears. You have to communicate it back and forth, and you have to make sure you're on the same page. Talk
Yep.
about the challenge of now working more in the business versus on the business. And I guess maybe I'm asking this from a personal standpoint, because when I moved into an operations manager role, I was still working on the business. I'm sorry, yeah, I was working in the business too much, to the point where the owner of the company asked me what I was in the middle of. I told him, and he said, well, apparently I need to get a new operations manager because you're not willing to do the job. You should be delegating that to somebody else. And I was
Right.
like, woo, like turning up the heat on me uh, right away. Can you talk about that challenge of, moving from the role of the COO, right, your operating officer, to moving more in that vision role and transitioning to work more on the business? Can you talk about that, the challenge, and how you're navigating that?
Sure. Yeah, it's a challenge. And I think it's too because it's so new for me that I really try to evaluate what I'm touching all day long and just have that thought of going, is this something I should be working on, or is this something I should be passing off to someone else to take? And at the time I might be in the weeds, but at least I'm making a note, or I'm coming back and following up later and saying, hey, I did this time, but this is going to start coming to you now because this really does fall more in your bucket and I'm going to get out of it. It's so easy to get into the weeds, right? Because it's where we've been forever.
Right.
And so I try to be intentional about taking time to myself, just sit back. People probably think I'm just staring out the window. I'm not. I'm thinking, and I'm pondering over, I try to take each one of our divisions. How are things going? What do I need to take care of? And, people, just strategy, right? And I've got to take that time, because if I don't take that personal time to do it, then I won't. And, our board very much is in line with that process as well. We talk about it all the time. We've got to work on the business. So I know that I have the support behind me. No one's sitting there telling me, hey, get in the weeds and why aren't you doing more of this? So they do allow me the luxury of stepping out occasionally, and I need to do better at it. It's a work in process.
Yes, yeah, it's an ongoing thing. And I can say Michelle Sirois, so president of BlueStar Canada, former chair of the RSPA board. And so when I moved into this RSPA CEO position, Michelle was my soon to be my boss, right? Because he was the chair of the board. And Michelle talked about he has a sales background and like he loves being in the middle of the deal, but he can't.
Right.
He can only be select deals that he gets involved in. I guess also if you can share with folks who maybe don't know BlueStar as well, you are not an organization where your executives are surrounded by executive assistants and bureaucracy and all sorts of stuff like that. Like, so talk about that. Like, there are some, organizations you walk into, there are all sorts of layers before you get to the executive suite. You guys are I would say blue collar, but essentially that's the way it is. So I guess, can you talk about that in terms of there aren't all these layers of executive assistants? That's not the culture you guys have.
Yes, you're accurate. We just like to call ourselves lean.
Yeah.
So, and I think that goes back to, we were run by accountants, right? We're too tight to spend the money. And so we never have had assistants. None of us at the executive level. We book our own travel. We send our own, scans and everything else. And we just do it all. And I have had people that have come up to me, and especially since I've moved into the new role, and said, well, something about having an executive assistant. And I just laugh at them. I'm like, no. And honestly, at this point, you go, well, I've done it for 22 years without one.
Right.
It would almost, be a slap in the face of others before me if I was to go and get one. I'm good. I don't really need one. But we are a lean organization, and we're not above doing anything. That's for sure. If we have to, you probably know this, but we would be out in the warehouse picking orders if that's what it meant. And we've done it, right? So we've done it multiple times over the years. It's just this whatever it takes mentality, and you dig in and you do it. And I'll say, from a leadership standpoint, that goes a long way too. When other people see you as an executive out doing the same work that they're doing, that goes a long way. And we still get comments from people, working in the warehouse, and they say, that was so great of you guys to come down and help us out when we really needed it.
Amen. And especially the universe that we live in, right? The retail IT channel, the customers, your partners. You mentioned about that, 5-employee partner that you talked with. He wasn't frustrated because of his executive assistant, right? They run lean as well, and so it really helps that you can, you're walking mile in their shoes way more. It's way more familiar. You don't have to try to get to know them in that degree. So
that's right.
And so let's talk about keep looking forward. And so I know, what I heard in the community, what's giving BlueStar partners confidence going forward, or a few, fundamentals with the organization. So first, Steve wasn't shy about, the principles and the behaviors that he valued, right? They're very clear to you. I know they're very clear to your employees. Also, you've alluded to, you have a very strong management team, right, that has a track record of working together successfully. And then you mentioned Steve, accountant by trade, he was a planner, so he did establish a succession plan. So can you talk about all of that together, from your own personal experience, and then also for our listeners and our viewers, the importance of having guiding principles and having a strong leadership team that can execute that plan when an emergency, when a tragedy occurs?
Yeah, absolutely. And those principles, those guiding principles, it's not just words, right? I mean, we lived it. And for me, it's very important. I've always said that if one, I didn't feel like I was heard, I wouldn't have stayed here. And two, if I was ever asked to do something that was against my morals and ethics, I wouldn't have been here. No job is worth, giving up your own personal beliefs in that case. And that is, I mean, Steve was just dead on in that. We had a very similar morals and ethics, and he always just said, you just do the right thing. And when you do the right thing, and sometimes, hey, someone else might not do the right thing, and you might get the short end of the stick. And if that's the case, that's okay. It's temporary pain, but you'll get the long reward. And so we always just stayed with that. Just do the right thing. You can't go wrong in that regards. So
and I can't remember if you shared it at the memorial service, if it was Doug Bivens, if it was somebody there, but they quoted Steve saying, I might not know what to do, but I know what not to do. Like, there were certain things you just like, I know I'm not going to do those things that you said step over the morals. Is that
that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Where do you get the is it just something you grew up with, or is it always been instilled in you, or is it somebody who really emphasized for you that, like you just said, hey, I'm not going to cross an ethical line, a moral line, like nothing is worth that, no deal is worth that, no job is worth that? Did somebody instill that in you, or is that just, over the years something that that's always been part of what you do?
I would say Christian values. And as I didn't grow up in the church, but as I turned mid-teens and became more active in the church, and as I matured, it was definitely more, I would say, presence in, this is what I need to make sure that I'm portraying to people. And you lose so much, right? If I turn around and someone can't trust me, or if I'm lying to them, just stand up and be true to your word, right? Then I'm going to lose all credibility. And not just from me as the CEO or the CFO, but me as an individual, right? And as a Christian as well. So I've just, I try to be strong, and, it's not always easy, but you just try to be strong in your beliefs and let those guide you.
So I'll say mine come from the same place. I went to a very small Christian school for high school. We only graduated 15 in our graduating class. Like, I mean, it was really tiny. And so a small Christian school, and they said they integrate Christian teaching into every class. So I had an accounting class. I remember thinking like, well, how are you going to work Christian principles into this? And Constant Ripley was the teacher. And I remember she started off the class saying, if you remember only one thing from this class, and to this day, this is the only thing I remember from that. I hope you're not offended as an accountant background. I'm not, but she said, if you remember one thing, no job is so important that you compromise your values and your ethics for it. You're better off getting fired or quitting that job in order to do that. And I can say very early in my career, I worked for some organizations that other people were going way over the line. And I was always like, well, no matter what the consequences are, I'm not going to draw that line. So I give credit to Constance Ripley for doing that. So, but like you said, it's the foundation of the church and everything that's built in.
That's right. I agree. And that's where I always tried to say, always wanted to be in a position where, financially, mentally, everything, I was prepared to have walkaway power. And if that day happened where something, I was pushed over the limit, am I prepared to stay or prepared to walk out the door? Or was I now a slave to the job because I hadn't prepared myself for it? So for me, that was always important, is just make sure that you set yourself up where you can have that walkaway power if that day ever came. And luckily, after 22 years, that day has never come.
No, and that's why it's so important to pick, if somebody's looking for a job, to pick the right organization. And when you're hiring people, to make sure you have people who align with your morals so it doesn't challenge you, right? Because you're not going to have somebody who drags you down to go, hey, lie, cheat, and steal. It's fine to do in this regard. Those things are way more
Right.
important than the actual tactical skills of the job. So,
Agreed. And you asked me about, the team behind me, and I want to brag on them. We just have such a great team. The executive team, as I've mentioned before, we've been working together for 20 plus years for most of us. And again, you know us, we have been pushing the cart together. There's no one sitting on the sideline watching us do it. We're all pushing the cart. And it makes it so much easier when we're doing that together. And then when you come to, emergencies, this is when I think we really shine. We've had a handful of those. And when I was interviewed for the COO position, they asked me about, well, what would you do when we have an emergency and things aren't going right? And I said, well, for me, I equate this to what I do at home. If things aren't going well at home, something's off, the vibe isn't right, anybody in the family can call a family meeting. And we meet around around the kitchen table, and we talk about it. How can we help? What can we do? How can we bring harmony back into the house again, right? And I told the board, I said, look, for me, when we have an emergency, we're going to huddle around the kitchen table, the conference room, and we're going to huddle and we're going to figure this thing out. And it's exactly what we've done, right? We did it during COVID. We've had ransomware attacks. We've had bad go lives. What do? We huddle around the conference room table. We brainstorm. No one comes in with, the silver bullet. And then we just go and put a plan together and attack it. So it's worked great for us. And I can tell you, there's just so much confidence when you've lived these kind of emergencies together, and you know that we know how to get through them together. You just don't have fear when you have this experience. And I appreciate my team very much for that.
This will be the second podcast in a row I roll off camera so I can grab this folder. I'm going to have to keep it closer, but I keep in the front of our team huddle folder. I've had this for years, and it's Mark Simpson. He was a controller when I was at Jameson Publishing, and he said, we seem to have a crossroad approaching, and we should have a discussion as a team so we can make a choice instead of having a path given to us. And then it also has under it the Jim Collins quote, I don't know where we should take this company, but I do know that if I start with the right people and ask them the right questions and engage them in vigorous debate, we will find a way to make this company great. That really sounds like what you're saying in terms of like, that's really all that it comes down to. When you're reaching a situation like that, got to have the right people, get them around the table and figure it out.
Yes, agreed.
A couple more questions for you. And
Sure.
so maybe folks are able to draw this out from what they've been hearing as we've been talking. But in your own words, can you describe your leadership style? I think there's some words I might be able to come up with from what I've heard, but I want to hear you say it in terms of what your thoughts, what are you striving for as a leader?
Yeah. So it's funny for me as a personality, I'm very even keel. We joke around here that, what you see here is me when I'm terribly excited and when I'm also terribly frustrated. So I don't have a lot of ups and downs. I'm not animated. I'm not a yeller. I'm not a cursor. This is just who I am. And so, I think it works well for most. But when I think about my style and what I want people to remember about me, and my goal is just to be authentic to who I am. I want to stay true to my authentic self. There's a lot of people pulling me in different directions right now, lots of different opportunities, and I just don't want to become someone that I'm not. And I've told my wife, if you ever see me starting to change, you have my permission. You just call me out on it. And I truly don't think that I can be a very effective leader if I've become someone I'm not. I really need to stay to my true self. So,
yeah,
go ahead.
Go on.
Well, I was going to say, and with that, and this is probably one of the words that you would have come up with now, is just being, again, intentional about how I go about doing things. I want people to be to feel that I'm invested in their success and well-being. So, I want to foster the atmosphere around here that people feel as if, they have a voice. We kind of talked about earlier, communications. We need to praise our team more. All of this you have to be intentional about it. And so that's the word I just keep mentioning over and over again. We have to be. And, honestly, a little bit of my utopia around this is also being how we relate to each other on a personal level. So, and this one, quite honestly, is probably the hardest one of all of them. I have a song that I like. It's a quirky song, I'll admit it up front, but the name of it is Truth Be Told. And the premise of the song is that we go about our day, and the typical greetings to each other is, "Hey, how are you doing?" And the typical response is, "I'm good, thanks. How are you?" Right? And you just move on. I'm like, but wouldn't it be good if all you said was, I didn't really have a good morning this morning, or I'm not feeling well today, or whatever. You're starting to be, one, a little bit vulnerable. But I mean, these are people that we work with every day, and we live a lot of life together, but we have this bit of a mask on. So again, it's my utopia, but I also say, it's so hard because you just get in your routine, right? You come into the office and you give the patent answer and you move on, and you really have to be intentional about say something different and be just a little bit more vulnerable to that person. And I try to do it. Mm-hmm. I'm not very good at it, but I try to do it. And quite honestly, this is not just within the four walls of BlueStar, right? This is throughout my daily activity that I try to be a little bit more intentional about how I relate to others.
Patrick Lencioni, who some folks know as a business consultant and author, I just listened to a podcast and he was talking about that exact thing in terms of if you can get your organization to that point, it's amazing that people are actually telling you how they're doing, like up, down, struggles, things of that nature. But I think he agreed with you in terms of to get to that is more of a utopia, but if you can move a few degrees in that direction, you are going to it's going to be more authentic, and folks will be able to work with each other better because they're truly going to know each other better. That's as right. Opposed to on a surface or transactional level.
Yep. And maybe there's a way that we can support each other, right? I mean, you never know the details of what someone might know that can say, "Hey, I dealt with that. Let me tell you how I dealt with it," or give a contact or something like that. So you just never know the rewards that could come from that.
Yeah. And I will say just one point, because I know a lot of folks on your leadership team, you talked about having your wife telling you when you get home, if you're not being your true self. I'm thinking a lot of folks on your leadership team, they'd be talking to you before you even had a chance to go home. They'd be like, "Hey, wait a second, that's not the real you." Because you guys do have a candid culture. I mean, I've seen it firsthand myself.
We do. Yes. And I think that comes with a history, right? I mean, we can sit in a room and we can yell and scream and fight, but the thing about it is then we can go and have a great time with each other because we all know that we're in it for the same reason. We might have different approaches, but we're all trying to get to the same goal, and that's just to be successful, right? So if we can be that direct with each other, I think that's a good thing.
Amen. So why don't we end our conversation today? I hope we can go full circle. So I started asking about at the start of this interview about the beginning of your career. So can you go back to that point early on? Is there a learning experience that was hugely impactful for you as a leader? Can you think of a story or a situation that taught you something, whether it's 15, 20 more years ago, that really even guides you today?
Yes. And I feel like this is one thing where I've done pretty well. I've tried to mature on this over the years, but early on in my career, I was all about just trying to get done, right? You have your tasks and you're multitask, and people will come in, and I remember I would just sit there and I'd be pounding away on my computer, never looking up, but having the conversation with someone. And it wasn't very long until Doug pulled me aside and said, to have this team allow you to lead them, you need to be more relatable to them. And what does that look like, right? So now, if someone comes in and I'm in the middle of an email or middle of a thought, I just tell them 1 second, let me finish my thought. And I finish it. I stop. I make eye contact. I engage. I listen. I give them whatever that, if they came in, it was obviously important to them to come in and take my time. So give them that time. Don't rush them. And to me, that has gone a long way. And being, it's part of that relatable, right? And your question is full circle. My answer is full circle. If you can be relatable, then you can be trusted. If you can be trusted, then they'll allow you to lead. And again, and that could be 360 degrees as well.
And to be relatable, you have to be present first, right? You have to give that person your full
That's right.
attention, or else you give off the vibe, right? Even if you're fully listening, but if
Yeah.
it appears that you're not, they're going to say, well, they have something more. There's something more important than me at this time.
That's right. That's right. Well said.
Excellent. Well, I've lived it. That's why I was smiling when you were talking about that, because I'm looking at my stuff. I have checklists. I have stuff I want to get done. But there are times where if somebody on your team, one of your customers, if they need you, you have to put down your pen, your mouse, your like whatever it is. Like that's the way, and you have to totally pay attention to them. I guess I've always said, like, I'm not smart enough to be able to do both at the same time, and they don't feel like they're being listened to, right? There's something
That's right.
about, even if you're really listening to them, people have to feel listened to as well. I don't know if that's part of what you're striving for as well, is to make sure that
Absolutely.
people know that you're listening to them.
It's the connection. Absolutely.
Great. Excellent. Well, last thing I do want to say to you is, this isn't a question, but just thanks for your support of the association. And folks might think, oh, you're just saying that because BlueStar is the platinum sponsor, but your team has been over the years very generous with time on committees and providing education and rolling out the red carpet for us at Vartech, and helping, drum up interest in retail now. And I mentioned about Michelle Sirois was a past chair, Mark Fraker was a past chair. And I guess and I think you might have alluded to this, or like, you guys get that the channel has a soul, right? This isn't just transactional relationships. So I guess I just want to say, like, that, thanks for being, channel guys and gals, and again, for helping the RSPA and our community.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a great partnership between us, a long history. So that's bodes well.
For sure. Well, that does it for this episode of The Trusted Advisor. If you enjoyed our discussion, be sure to subscribe to the RSPA YouTube channel and the Trusted Advisor podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you'd like to learn more best practices for VARs and ISVs in the retail technology industry, check out the RSPA blog. You can find it at gorspa.org, and then clicking on RSPA blog. Before we go, big thanks again to Ryan Girvin for sharing his wisdom with us today. Thanks also to RSPA Marketing Director Chris Arnold for his production work, Joseph McDade for our music, and last but not least, thanks so much to you for listening. Our goal at the RSPA is to accelerate the success of our members in the retail technology ecosystem by providing knowledge and connections. For more information, visit our website at gorspa.org. Thanks for listening, and goodbye, everybody.